Welcome in, everybody. My name is Jason Elam. This is Good Neighbor Politics, the podcast. I'm so excited to be back with you again this week. We're about 3 weeks in to this little experiment of good neighbor politics. Can we find common ground around common sense policies that are just good for everybody, no matter where you fall on the conservative progressive spectrum? Now, I don't want to pretend that I am some, independent, unaffiliated person. I started off as a Republican, voted for George W. Bush twice. September 11th really kind of made me sick to my stomach in that we were calling for vengeance, which I don't believe is ever a healthy thing. I think vengeance is toxic, and it's not something that is good for humanity. It's not good for us. It's certainly not good for our enemies. We went into Iraq, killed, conservative estimates say, 250,000 civilians, and that made me sick, who had nothing to do with September 11th, by the way. And they were kind of guilty by association. We're like, well, they shouldn't live in that country if they don't want to get bombed. That's ridiculous. That's a terrible, terrible way to think about your fellow humans. And so I left the Conservative Party, the Republican Party. I went more independent, kind of had a libertarian bent for a while. I was kind of in the middle of the road, familyless, politically, and didn't know where to turn. I ended up becoming much more, and I am a very progressive person at this point in my life, 51 years old, and I think that's kind of normal. We get older, we get more progressive. I've heard the opposite, but that's definitely not my experience personally. I want to be clear that the Democratic Party, especially the Democratic leadership in Congress, have failed America. And as much trouble as you will hear me giving the Trump administration, because they are absolutely clueless when it comes to running a government, because it's not a business. Government exists for the benefit of all. And Donald Trump is running it like a business, but he's not even running it like a business well. The tariffs are causing prices to rise. And now here in the end of September 2025, he is about to do a bailout for farmers because they're in desperate need because the tariffs have cut off their orders. And so they are having soybeans rot in the field, other crops rotting in the field. There are no buyers internationally due to the tariffs. And so America and America's farmers who feed America are suffering, and so we're about to have to bail them out, which is appropriate in this circumstance, but it was completely unnecessary because the tariffs caused the bailout, caused their dire circumstances that required the bailout. So I will take Trump to task for so many things in these episodes, but today I want to speak specifically to Democratic leaders, especially those in Congress, past, present, and future. And I'm titling this episode, Democrats, America Has Lost Faith in You. Recent polling shows the Democratic brand as a party is abysmal. It is terrible. Now, Trump is severely underwater. He's not nearly as popular as he thinks he is nationally. If you look at even Fox News polls, I saw a recent Fox News poll this week that showed 51% disapproval on Trump's handling of the economy. They think he's made things worse. Even Fox News is saying, Fox News viewers are saying that Donald Trump has made the economy worse. That used to be one of his strongest issues, immigration and the economy. Typically, if you look at the postmortem, you look at the autopsy of the 2024 election, statistically, the economy and immigration were the two issues that were the driving force for Americans. I personally believe that Democrats failed to distinguish themselves enough from Donald Trump. The conventional wisdom says Democrats need to move to the center in order to win elections. I think that is false. I think that's ridiculous because we're dealing with Donald Trump and the MAGA party. They're not afraid to break stuff. They're not going to follow the rules. They're going to see their agenda implemented. Now, Project 2025 told us really clearly what their agenda would be for this term. Trump said, I don't know anything about Project 2025. I have nothing to do with that. And then he hired all the people who wrote it and is implementing the policies exactly as laid out in Project 2025. Everything we're seeing unfolding on the evening news played out first in Project 2025, the book that was released before the election, but he lied. He said he didn't have anything to do with it, and he clearly did, since he hired all the people who wrote it to run his administration. But as abysmal as his ratings are, the Democratic Party's ratings are worse. So, heading into the 2026 midterm election and the 2028 presidential election, Democrats have a serious task ahead of them to re-earn the trust of the American people. And I have some things today that I want to suggest that Democrats who are in Congress and running for Congress do over this next year before the Democratic midterms. Now, I'm not a consultant. I'm not political class. I'm not even a pundit. I'm just a voter. But I'm a frustrated voter. I literally changed my party affiliation. Here in Florida, you have to claim one. You're either a Republican, a Democrat, a Libertarian, or no party affiliation. And so I changed mine to Democrat so that I could vote in the Democratic primary a few years ago. And so I am a card-carrying member of the Democratic Party at this point. I will always be as long as Donald Trump and the MAGA folks are out there. But there are some serious things that need to be done in order to win back the trust of the American people. If Democrats have any hope of doing that, I'll tell you what it reminds me of. You remember the song Christina Aguilera and a partner wrote many years ago, "Say Something, I'm Giving Up on You." That's what plays in my mind when I listen to so many Democratic leaders talking today about the circumstances we're in. Yes, we are absolutely in the fight of our life against authoritarianism, tyranny, and fascism. And what's astounding to me is that the people who have said all their lives we need guns to fight tyranny are cheering for the tyrant because he's doing things they've always wanted done, even if it hurts their neighbors. And so we're seeing America with troops in our streets. We're seeing mothers being ripped away from their children and deported to countries they've never been to. We're seeing kids with cancer get deported in the midst of their chemotherapy. And it's disgusting. And in order for there to be a real opposition party, Democrats are going to have to get their crap together, and it needs to happen right now. The number one thing we're going to have to do, Democrats, Democratic leaders, the number one thing we have to do is something Donald Trump is absolutely incapable of, and that is to admit that we were wrong. Admit that we stopped listening to voters. Admit that you stopped taking them seriously about what they needed and what they told you that they wanted. Admit that incremental change is not what we needed in 2020, and it's certainly not what we need today. Voters want somebody who is fighting for their interests and isn't afraid to break some stuff in that process. For example, we all see every day Donald Trump's getting taken to court because he is breaking the law to implement some of his immigration policies, the tariffs. He doesn't have authority to impose tariffs on other countries. He can't send troops into other countries without congressional authority. Lots of presidents have done it, but they shouldn't have, including Obama. None of them should have done it without congressional authority. That authority does not exist for Donald Trump to drop a bomb on a boat in South America that he suspects might have drug dealers. And he said they were headed towards America with fentanyl. I don't think we have any idea what was on the boat, but 11 souls were on the boat. They were headed to the United States. They saw the military firepower heading their way. They turned around. They were heading away from America when we bombed them and killed them. Now, if you don't realize how terrifying that is, Donald Trump has set himself up as judge, jury, and executioner. Those people didn't get a trial. Those people did not get an opportunity to prove their innocence. We just murdered them because someone somewhere decided they had drugs on that boat. Now, I have known a lot of drug dealers in my life. I've never been a drug dealer, never wanted to be a drug dealer, never used drugs. But I've known people who were drug dealers. And some of them reformed and made really impressive changes in their lives and become very responsible citizens of the country. I don't think we need to be imposing those kinds of blanket decisions where we're taking out people without any kind of a trial. That's not what America is about. But Trump's supporters love the fact that he's willing to do stuff to implement his agenda, to put in the tariffs. Of course, they've turned around to bite the country in the behind, and now it's viewed very unpopularly that he was willing to do that. He's implementing his immigration policies against court orders sometimes. He's firing government employees. It was hugely popular. Doge was being defended online even as they were losing cases in court because they were breaking the law. Why do MAGA supporters support that? Because he's not willing to break some stuff in order to implement his agenda. Now, again, that agenda has been bad, and that agenda has proven catastrophic for this country, and it needs to be reversed. But in order for Democrats to be entrusted with being the opposition we need the next 2 years, leading up to the 2028 presidential election, when Donald Trump will, thank God, never be president of this country again, assuming we have an election, then we need to do some things to reinterest. We need to admit that we were wrong, that we stopped listening. We need to admit that we were being too incremental with the changes. Joe Biden said, I'm going to forgive $10,000 worth of student debt. If you qualified for a Pell Grant, we'll make it $20,000 of student debt. Most of the people who were very excited about that debt relief never received it. Why? Because the courts stopped him. Conservatives sued, and the courts stopped him. People started to think, well, Joe Biden might have some good ideas, but he can't get anything implemented. And then as he got older, they gave up on him, and that toxic brand carried over to Kamala Harris. Now, I personally believe Gaza had a lot to do with that. A lot of Democratic voters stayed home. Millions of voters who voted for Joe Biden in 2020 stayed home during the 2024 election, I believe, because they were seeing what was taking place in Gaza. And neither one of the major party candidates were taking a strong enough stand against Israel and saying, we're going to stop this from taking place to these Palestinian people. Neither one of them were doing that. Both of them were heavily influenced by AIPAC money, that is the American Israeli Political Action Committee, whose sole job it is to control any negative news stories about Israel, the government of Israel, and their policies, and keep American politicians supporting the state of Israel in their government. Now, evangelicals have some really messed up theology in this regard, because they're all like, well, we got to support Israel because, the end times are coming, and those who support Israel are going to stand with Israel, and everybody else are going to be the enemies of God. When Jesus Christ of Nazareth himself said, in Christ there is no Jew or Gentile or Palestinian. Those don't exist anymore if you're adhering to Christian scripture. There are no dividers of humans. We are all one human family. And so it's very important as a Christian to support what is good for humanity as a whole. And starving children, bombing their hospitals, shooting them when they line up for food isn't good for humanity. But neither of the two major presidential candidates in 2024 took a strong enough stand and said, we're going to stop that from happening. And of course, now Trump is in office talking about turning the Gaza Strip into a luxury resort for billionaires. Biden couldn't implement his agenda with student loan and so many student debt and so many other things. And Trump does whatever he wants and doesn't care what anybody thinks. We need out-of-the-box thinking that makes a real difference without breaking the law. So could Joe Biden have just said, I'm deleting the records of the student debt effective immediately for, up to $20,000. I'm deleting those records. And then who could stop him at that point? He didn't do that. He had respect for the process. The process is broken. The process doesn't work. And so we've got to find a way to make real change without breaking the law. Number two, we've got to disavow all PAC money. PAC money. Political action committees are pouring billions of dollars into elections. They're manipulating politicians to get policies that are good for their company, their country. AIPAC, I've already mentioned, that's Israel's lobbying arm that keeps the American government providing military weapons to them as they are committing genocide in Palestine. It's ridiculous. It has to stop. We've got to disavow all PAC money. So if you are running for Congress, if you are running for president as a Democrat, please, 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 please disavow the PAC money. The voters will meet you there. We're going to line up to support people who aren't being bought off by lobbyists, who aren't being bought off by the state of Israel, who aren't being bought off and manipulated to enact an agenda that is opposite what the American people want. What's so ridiculous to me is that the state of Israel, which so many people on the right specifically are cheering as they're committing genocide, they have universal health care for their citizens, and we do not. But we send them money. Please tell me how that makes sense. How does it make sense that we are about to bail out Venezuela when we have people right here in the United States who are going bankrupt because somebody in their family got cancer? We've got to find a better way forward. We've got to commit that we are not going to allow stock trading in Congress because there's a lot of insider information in the Congress and they're making money off of that. No more taking meetings with fundraisers or lobbyists. We've got to commit to being the party of the American worker and to always do what's best for the common good. No more business as usual. We've got to start being an actual opposition party in the Congress. No more confirmations for Trump appointees. None. Zero. Nada. No votes for a budget bill until Trump withdraws all these troops from American cities where they are constitutionally not supposed to be anyway. Trump has basically turned ICE into his own private secret police force. He's not allowed to do that, but nobody's stopping him. And so, Democrats, it's time to step up, put your big boy, big girl britches on, and head out and say, we are not going to pass a budget, not a continuing resolution. We will shut the whole damn thing down if you don't get the troops out of American cities. If you don't get Israel to pull out of Gaza. We're going to stop sending them money. We're going to stop arming them to commit genocide, effective immediately. No more votes for any of that without the troops being pulled out of the American cities, without Israel pulling out of Gaza, and without the unredacted Epstein files being released to the public. Something like 80% of voters across the political spectrum, Democrats, Republicans, MAGA even, want to see the Epstein files. It's been troubling to me the last couple of weeks to see that we've turned Charlie Kirk into a martyr. And I understand, listen, it's sad. The young man died. He was murdered in cold blood. It should have never happened. It should have never been allowed to happen. There was a sniper on the roof, shot him right in the neck in front of thousands of people. That should never have happened. But while they're lionizing Charlie Kirk and Trump shows up to speak at his funeral, we've already forgotten that Charlie Kirk was calling every day for the Jeffrey Epstein files to be released, unredacted in their entirety. And so if you really want to honor the life of Charlie Kirk, release the Epstein files. If Mr. President, if you have nothing to hide, let it all out there. You say that you're protecting supporters. You say that there are important people who might be mentioned in those files. You know exactly who's mentioned in those files. You know that you're mentioned in those files a variety of times, probably dozens of times, if not more, because Jeffrey Epstein said you were his best friend for 10 years. And there is very little in the average American voter's mindset. There is very little distance between a pedophile and somebody who would be the pedophile's best friend for 10 years. Especially when the best friend has made comments about he'd like to date his daughter, and who has said publicly on the Howard Stern show that his daughter, who was 17 at the time, begged him not to ever date anyone younger than him. Or her, I'm sorry. Not to ever date anyone younger than her at 17. Now, why would your daughter have to say that to you if you're not the type of person who'd be dating children? So we've got to do that. Democrats, not one more vote for one more appointee, not one more vote for a budget, not one more vote for a continuing resolution to keep the government open unless the unredacted Epstein files are made public. Until Trump withdraws all the American troops from American city streets and Israel pulls out of Gaza. We've got to go back to 1994. Republicans won Congress with what they called a contract with America. It is a pledge with voters that rebuilds trust. We're saying this is what we will do if you entrust us with power. And so we've got to be willing to do some things that our lobbyist friends and our sponsors in Congress have not allowed us to do, that the American people want. Number one, they want you to raise the minimum wage. The minimum wage in America has not been raised in over like 30 years. It's $7.75 an hour. Nobody can live off of that. Now, a majority of states now have minimum wages statewide that would put you way over that. Here in Florida, on Emily's birthday, September 30th, 2024. I'm sorry, 2004 was her birthday. Every year here in Florida, on Emily's birthday, the minimum wage goes up $1 until next year. So I believe we're going to hit $14 an hour this year here in Florida. But that's not happening statewide. In the state of Alabama, minimum wage is $7.75. Now in California, I believe minimum wage for fast food workers is like $20 an hour. I think we need to commit to a federal minimum wage that gets you to where you can afford housing, food to eat, utilities to keep your housing comfortable and livable, and medical care in order to, have one full-time job cover all the bases. If $20 doesn't do that, then we need to make it higher. But we need, as Democrats, if we're going to be an opposition party, if we're going to regain the trust of the American voter, we're going to have to commit to passing a federal minimum wage increase. Put that on Donald Trump's desk, make him refuse to sign it. Commit to lower the minimum age for Medicare. Medicare is the most efficiently run healthcare in the United States. Our healthcare right now is a for-profit system. That means that United Healthcare, which has a deplorable record of rejecting claims, they have AI deciding whether or not that you can get the medical care that you need if you're a United Healthcare subscriber. They have AI deciding it, and their target range of denial, at least for a period of time, was about 30%. So they were denying 30% of claims based on their AI telling them that it was unnecessary, even if your doctor ordered it. That is deplorable. That is not what the American people want. Something like 70% of the American voters want a universal health care system. I'm not talking about socialism. I'm talking about common good politics. I'm talking about everybody having health care. If you want better health care than Medicare, you could still buy your private policy if you want one. If you want to trust billionaires to decide if you need health care, that will be your right. But lower the age of Medicare by 5 years every year moving forward until everyone is eligible. Because Medicare is the most efficient healthcare system we have. And if you can come up with something better, we'll do that. But until then, let's do Medicare for all. Make everybody eligible for Medicare. It's not tied to your job. You don't lose it when you change employers. Your employer cannot use it against you. There's no deductibles. We can remove copays. We can, for the love of God, can we all agree that your eyes and your teeth are part of your body and should be covered under health care? I think that's a common sense policy, right? So let's include dental and vision for everyone as part of Medicare, and every year roll back the age. Right now it's 65. Roll it back 5 years every year until everyone is eligible. If you don't want it, you don't have to take it. We need to commit to passing tuition-free college, trade schools, and childcare. You got to have childcare to keep a job. You've got to have a college education in order to succeed, to really thrive in this life and be able to afford to not have to work 2 or 3 different jobs. And so let's pass education from cradle to grave, tuition free. Again, you still have options to go to better schools if you want to pay tuition. You still have the option of better child care. If you want to put your child in a private institution, they would have that option, just like private schools and public schools. But we're going to fund it for everyone because it's a need at this point in our lives. It's not just a want. Democrats, it's time to commit to pass common sense gun laws and reenact the ban on AR-15s and automatic or semi-automatic weapons that saved thousands of lives when Bill Clinton signed it back in the 90s. That was allowed to expire. Those guns are all legal again now, and it's time that we ban them. If you look at the school shootings, if you look at the church shootings, typically it's an AR-15 type weapon. And so, yes, I understand. It's not... my conservative friends will say, well, the guns don't do the firing. You're right. But until we can stop all the bad people from getting them, let's stop them from getting these that do so much damage in such a short period of time that we're unable to stop them before they've killed, tens or hundreds of people. So let's do that. Let's ban semi-automatic weapons. What do you need it for anyway? You said you needed it in case the government became tyrants. Well, we're in an authoritarian state right now, and nobody's using those, and I don't recommend it. I am 100% against political violence. I'm against violence of every stripe, and so I don't want to see any political violence. Even though I believe Trump is a dictator and authoritarian, he's breaking the law left and right, I don't think we should murder him. I think we should put him in prison. And we've got to commit to ending gerrymandering nationwide. Right now in Texas, Donald Trump won Texas. And he thinks he won it so big that he deserves extra congressional seats. He said that they dominated the Texas presidential election, so they are entitled to additional Republican seats. And so the Texas legislature went to work and carved out these ridiculous-looking congressional districts that put more Republican voters in districts to outnumber Democrats. When you do that, you are telling your people who vote that their vote doesn't matter, because you've carved up the districts so that you get the results you want before anybody votes. Gerrymandering is wrong. It's wrong when Texas does it. It's wrong when California does it, although I understand the impulse in this occasion. When Texas has already done it, they've got to try to balance the playing field. Let's ban it nationwide. Let's say no. Congressional districts need to be constructed not on ideological lines, but just based on population. We want to make sure that minority views are represented. If one district is primarily Hispanic or African American, you don't want to water down their voice by adding all the rich people from the suburbs in order to get it where you want it to be politically. That should be illegal. So Democrats, it's time to earn back the trust of the American people by doing a few simple, common, good policies that are going to make a real difference in lives every day. Admit we were wrong, admit that we stopped listening, and then start listening again. The only reason Israel is still in Gaza is because AIPAC money has paid off politicians to look the other way. If you'll stop taking the PAC money, we'll support you with our vote and maybe with some campaign contributions. They supported Trump because they didn't see enough of a difference between Trump and Kamala Harris in policy-wise. Kamala was saying, if you vote for me, it's going to be just like Joe Biden was still president, except I'm not 80 years old. That was basically her pitch. And she was promising the status quo. Nobody wants the status quo. The system is broken. It's time to fix it. It's going to take big, bold moves to fix it. Donald Trump promised to fix it and then went the exact opposite direction. And now a lot of the people who voted for him are saying, you know what? The price of eggs hasn't come down. The price of gas hasn't come down. The price of healthcare hasn't come down. He promised on day one groceries were going to be more affordable. Here we are, more than 100 days into the Trump presidency, and things are only getting worse. And guess what? They're getting worse because of the tariffs that he enacted. Prices are skyrocketing. Housing prices aren't coming down. The prices of everyday goods are not coming down. And so it's time to take some real action, make real change. If you'll swear off Democratic leaders, Democratic hopefuls, running for Congress, running for president, swear off PAC money. Don't be afraid to break some stuff. Get your hands dirty. Get out there and make a real difference without breaking the law. Show them how it's done. Disavow that PAC money. Quit taking AIPAC money. If you take money from AIPAC, I am never going to vote for you, and I hope nobody else will either. No more business as usual. No more confirmation. We're starting right now, starting today, September 29th, 2025. No more votes for continuing resolutions. No more votes for Trump appointees. No more votes for a budget bill until Trump pulls those troops out of American cities, Israel pulls out of Gaza, and the unredacted Jeffrey Epstein files are released. We're going to launch a contract with America type, or contract with the American worker, maybe type pledge that says we're going to commit to raising the minimum wage to at least $20 an hour, maybe more. We're going to commit to lowering minimum wage. Raising the minimum wage over 20, commit to lowering the minimum age for Medicare by 5 years every year until every American has the option to join and end the ridiculous notion that eyes and teeth are not to be included in health care. We're going to pass tuition-free college and education, pass common sense gun laws. We're going to end gerrymandering nationwide. Now, those are policies that the vast majority of Americans agree on across the political spectrum. You do that and they take you seriously. If they believe you, they'll vote for you. And you can be the real opposition party that we desperately need in this age of authoritarianism. Are all these policies going to get implemented? No. Trump's not going to sign most of them. But that will set up whoever's running for president in 2028, and if they will also make those same commitments and follow through. See, that's the difference. Democrats are pretty good at saying the right things, but then they get in power and they don't do the right things. And so it's time for you, Democratic leaders and Democratic hopefuls, to re-earn the trust of the American people by doing what you say you're going to do. And that's my rant for this week. I do have a couple of things that I want to respond to. I've gotten some feedback from last week's episode, and I want to say thank you to those who took time to tell me either on Instagram or email, on social media, what your thoughts were. Now, last week I made some statements about Jesus being with those who are suffering. And someone was very kind, very compassionate to reach out to me on Instagram and made a comment and said, I don't agree with you saying that Jesus is with some but not with others. Now, let me be clear. I am, at this point in my life, after being a Christian pastor for 20 years, I am a very hopeful universalist. I believe with all my heart that everybody's going to spend eternity with God in heaven. Every single human who has ever lived. I believe, of course, Charlie Kirk. I believe, of course, Ronald Reagan. I believe, of course, even as far as Hitler and Osama bin Laden. Now, that doesn't mean they're not going to go through some things in the afterlife before they spend eternity with God. But what I believe happens in eternity is that all of the hate, all of the racism, all of the toxic stuff that's inside of us gets burned away by the love of God until all that's left, all of our addictions, all of our deception, all of that gets burned away until all that's left is pure love. And so when I say that Jesus is with the suffering, I'm not saying that God doesn't love everybody. I believe God does love everybody. You know, Jesus said, you think of yourselves, humans, as good parents. Which of you, if your son asked for bread, would hand him a stone or a snake? I think he was saying, do you really believe you're a better parent than God is? Do you really believe that God is going to burn people for all eternity when you wouldn't do that to your own child? I mean, I love the movie The Shack, based on the book, of course, which I also love. But in the movie, it's so clear because Wisdom asks Mac, the main character of The Shack, which of your kids would you condemn for all eternity? Which of your kids would you burn for eternity? And Mac's like, nobody. What? Why would I? No, I can't do that. Of course you can't. And God won't either. And the misreadings of Scripture that make people think that that's who God is have given people a false impression of who God is. That's not who God is at all. God is love, and there is no but. Justice looks like love having its way in your life, in my life. And so please don't, when I say Jesus is with the suffering, I'm really quoting Elie Wiesel, who lived through the Holocaust, and after people were hanged in front of him, the Jews of his day were saying, where's God in all of this? As innocent people are being murdered by despicable dictators, where is God in all of this? And Elie Wiesel's response was, he's in the gallows. He's there with the suffering. God is with us in our suffering. And so if we're deporting families, if we're separating them, if we're taking kids with cancer and deporting them to countries where they can't get the treatment that could save their lives, if we're taking farm workers away from farmers and deporting them and skyrocketing the price of food to where people can't afford it anymore, then yes, I believe with all my heart that God is with those who are suffering, and he's against oppressors. Doesn't mean they're not going to spend eternity with him after they go through some things in the afterlife. That's not what I'm saying. We've got to quit hearing things through a religious filter. What I'm saying is Jesus stands with victims and not the fake, right now, evangelicals especially, we're victim over everything. I keep seeing these stupid videos on social media. Well, the barista at Starbucks wouldn't announce my drink as the Charlie Kirk drink. Are we seriously upset about that? Is that for real? Are you serious? Because I remember a few years ago when some bakers refused to make a wedding cake for a gay couple, that y'all same folks were saying that a private business owner has the opportunity to do whatever they want in their business. And so now we're going to criticize Starbucks employees for not calling a drink by a name that it's not called on the menu. I mean, we need to stop. We are not victims. White, middle-class evangelicals are probably some of the most privileged people that have ever lived in the world right here in the United States of America, especially with Donald Trump, catering to the evangelical movement. And so we need to stop with the victimization. Real victims are the people who are suffering the deportations. They're suffering from horrible diseases when they can't afford their health care, their medication. They're suffering from gun violence. And I would include, Charlie Kirk in that. He was a real victim of gun violence. Now, while he was alive, made statements about some collateral damage would be worth it to keep our guns. Well, unfortunately, that worked out against him. And he became part of that collateral damage. I hope today he would say a different answer to that question. But he's not here, so I'll do it. We've got to stop arming mentally ill people who want to wreak havoc in our society. And that means banning those semi-automatic and automatic weapons. All right. So I want to make that clear, that I am not for any kind of I'm not saying that Jesus is going to reject you because you're a Republican. I'm not going to say Jesus is going to reject you because you're a Democrat. I'm saying God's heart is with those who are being oppressed. That the Scripture is full of that from front to back. If you don't believe me, go check out the New Testament. It's all over the place. God's heart is with the oppressed. Jesus said in Luke chapter 4, he came to break the chains of oppression. And that's not just talking about sin. That's not just talking about in eternity. That's talking about right here, right now. That's why Jesus healed sick people. That's why he fed thousands when they were just a little hungry. They just had a long journey to get home. They weren't starving to death. But he cared. He was moved with compassion. The Bible says he cried when a friend of his had died, even though he was about to raise that friend from the dead. He was with people in their suffering, and he brought that man back to life, moved by compassion. It's time for some of the people who call themselves by the name of Jesus to be moved with that same compassion. Quit pointing fingers at people who are well, they're just illegals. No, there's no such thing as illegal on stolen land. And it's all stolen land. The original Americans were murdered, pushed out, and colonized for the sake of this country that we now enjoy. And so nobody is a real American except for a Native American. They were the ones who were here first. And so the whole thing about making America great again, that's just about trying to make America white again, or making it a privilege to be white again in the United States, because white people are becoming a minority in very short order. In the next few years, white people will be in the minority, not the majority. And that's why Trump gets reelected when he says some of the things he says. People are thinking, well, he's got my interests at heart. It's time for we the people to vote for somebody who has all of our interests at heart, who has humanity at heart. And the American people are crying out for real change. And Democrats, if you're going to be the ones that give it to us, if you want to have the privilege of our vote, it's time for you to start re-earning the trust of the American voter by doing what you say you're going to do. Quit taking money from people who don't have common good interests at heart, and trust the American voter to support you to make up for the difference of you not taking all that corporate PAC money and not letting lobbyists run the show in Washington, D.C. anymore. Finally, today, I do want to say I got a really nice, again, very genuine, compassionate message from a family member yesterday by text message saying, hey, I'm thinking about the death penalty. What are your views on that? And I wanted to share my response with you. You know, Jesus actually did. He was the judge in one death penalty trial. Most of us miss that when we read the scriptures because we're reading it through a religious lens and we don't see what's really happening. But adultery was a crime punishable by death in the days of Jesus. The laws that the society of Jesus' day were living under allowed them to stone the woman caught in adultery. That's the term that she's referred to by evangelicals, the woman caught in adultery. I always wondered what happened to the man who was caught in adultery. We don't ever hear about him. He might have been one of them about to throw stones. We don't know. But this woman who's caught in the act of adultery is thrown at the feet of Jesus, and they're looking for his permission to stone her. They're trying to trip him up. They're trying to turn the crowd against him. They thought he would answer in a way that would turn people against him, so they brought her to him for judgment. He had the opportunity to invoke the death penalty. If you look at the laws, the Jewish laws, the Hebraic laws written in the Old Testament, they call for her death. What did Jesus do? He said, you without sin cast the first stone. If you're going to decide that it's your business to be deciding who lives and who dies rather than God's, then you go ahead, but you better make sure your hands are clean. And so based on that reading of that scripture, I cannot support the death penalty. I believe in grace for everyone. As I told you earlier, I think Hitler and Osama bin Laden are going to have all of their mental illness and all of their vengeance and all of that toxicity drawn out by the light of Christ in the afterlife, if they haven't already, and will spend eternity with God. So I am never going to cheer the execution of anybody. Plus, about 10% of executions later get exonerated. Troy Davis died in Georgia a few years ago, and I really connected with that story. I'm not sure why. I'm not sure what about that story really grabbed hold of me, but it became clear to me that he was innocent. He died in Georgia. Georgia would not afford him the opportunity to prove his innocence, and they executed him. And there have been countless stories of people being executed who were later found out to be innocent. If one innocent person gets executed, then we're the murderers. And so therefore we cannot support capital punishment. We cannot support the death penalty. Again, common sense solution. That's good neighbor politics. I'll be back with you next week. I want to hear what you think Democrats need to do between now and our next episode. Let me know on social media. Shoot me an email, jason.elam@me.com. Let me know what you think Democrats need to do to re-earn the trust of the American voter. And I can't wait to hear from you. I look forward to talking to you again soon. You have a great week. Until then.